Hello, welcome to activities 3 and 4 of the Unit 2 Lesson 5 notes. So if you can recall, our learning objectives for this lesson were you'll be able to find two constants of proportionality for a proportional relationship, and you'll be able to write two equations representing a proportional relationship described by a table or story. So in this question, it said it took Priya 5 minutes to fill a cooler with 8 gallons of water from a faucet that was flowing at a steady rate. Let W be the number of gallons of water in the cooler after T minutes. Which of the following equations represent the relationship between W and T? Select all that apply. So the first thing we have to do is fill out our tables to help us identify the constant of proportionality. So it tells us that it took Priya 5 minutes to fill 8 gallons of water. So in my first table, I'm going to put 8 in the first column and 5 in the second column. To figure out my constant of proportionality, remember it's always the second column divided by the first column. So I'm going to do 5 over 8. 5 over 8 is equal to 0.625. So I know the constant of proportionality is 0.625. Now, to write my equation, it helps to have an entry with a variable. Now, we're talking about W is representing the water and T is representing time. So I'm going to add an entry for W in the W column. I know that I am going to multiply this by 0.625. So my entry is 0.625 times W. So this tells me that T is equal to 0.625 times W, and that matches with equation D. Now I'm going to do the other table where this time it's 5 minutes first and then 8 gallons second. To write my ratio, again, I'm going to do the second column divided by the first column, so that's 8 over 5. And that is equal to 1.6. So again, if T is time and W is water, I do need an entry with my variable. So I'm going to put T right there, and I know I'm going to multiply by 1.6 because we said the constant of proportionality for this one is 1.6. So that's 1.6 times T. So that tells us my equation is going to be W equals 1.6 times T, and that is equation A. So now we have to answer the rest of the question. So what does 1.6 tell you about this situation? So this is our constant of proportionality, but we don't want to just say it's the constant of proportionality. If we were to add on our table that one value for each one, and if I were to multiply each one by the constant of proportionality, I get 0.625 for the first table and 1.6 for the second table. So looking at the first table, we see 1 is under the gallons of water, but 0.625 is under the minutes. And then for the second table, 1 is under minutes, and 1.6 is under the gallons of water. So to answer that first question, we know that for every 1 minute, there is 1.6 gallons of water. and we're talking about water being filled. Now, the other one, 0.625, we're saying for every 1 gallon filled, it takes 0.625 minutes. All right, we're going to skip the last 2 questions and just kind of digest this situation. So in the previous activity, we talked about when you go from one to the other and then you go back, that the constants of proportionalities are reciprocals. Now, if we were to look at the fraction versions of these constant of proportionalities, 5/8 and 8/5, we can see that they are indeed reciprocals. So the decimal versions, which are 0.625 and 1.6, these are also reciprocals. And we know that because when we look at the fractions, we can see that the fractions are flipped, so they're reciprocals. Notice that the equations, so if we go back to the equations, the variables switch spots. So here the W is next to the 0.625, but here the W is in front. And then the other way around, here the T is next to the constant of proportionality, and over here the T is by itself. So when you're writing these equations, just note that not only do you take the reciprocal of the constant of proportionality, but you also switch the locations of the variables. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next activity. So in this activity, it talks about feeding shrimp. So at an aquarium, a shrimp is fed 1/5 gram of food each feeding, and it is fed 3 times a day. So right off the bat, if I know it's fed 3 times a day, I know I'm going to have to multiply 1/5 by 3. And I'm going to multiply by 3 over 1 because 1/5 is a fraction, so I need 3 to be a fraction as well. And I see that it gets 3/5 gram of food every day. Okay, the next thing it says complete the table to show how many grams of food the shrimp is fed over different numbers of days. So if this is how much they're getting per day, this is my my constant of proportionality because this is my rate. So in this case, I am saying that K is equal to 3/5. So it says complete the table. So that means I'm going to multiply by 3/5 every time. And when I do this on my calculator, all I'm going to do is 3 divided by 5, and that equals 0.6. And then I'm going to take that and multiply by each of these numbers. So go ahead and pause the video and do that. Okay, so 3/5 for 1 day, that means they're going to get 0.6 grams. For 7 days, that means they're going to get 4.2 grams. And then for 30 days, that means they're going to get 18 grams. So again, we know 3/5 is the constant of proportionality. And this tells us for every 1 day, the shrimp get 3/5 of a gram of food. Question 4 says if we switch the columns in the table, what would the constant of proportionality be? And how do you know? Well, in the last 2 activities, we talked about when you go One way, you have a constant of proportionality, but when you go back the other way, you take the reciprocal. So it would become 5/3. We know this because we need to take the reciprocal. For 5, it says use D for the numbers of days and F for the amount of food in grams that a shrimp eats, and to write 2 equations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the top of my table. D is the numbers of days. F is food in grams. I am going to add an entry to my table for D. So if I multiply that by 3/5, I get 3/5 times D. So now my equation is going to be F equals 3/5 times D. So that is one of my equations. To write the second equation, remember, we're going to take the reciprocal, so it becomes 5/3. And we also talked about how the variables need to change places. So before, 3/5 was being multiplied by D. Now I'm going to multiply it by F, and it's going to be equal to D. So this equation is helpful because when we already know how much food they're going to get, we can figure out how many days that will cover. So for question 6, it said if the tank has 10 shrimp in it, how much food is added to the tank each day? So first, we're going to do 10 times 3/5. And when I do that, I get 6 grams. So this tells us in order to feed 10 shrimp, they need 6 grams of food every day. To figure out how many shrimp, how many days we can have for 300 grams, all I'm going to do is take 300 and divide it by 6, and I get 50. So I know that 300 grams of food will feed 10 shrimp for 50 days. So just to summarize this lesson, keep in mind that for any situation, we can always write 2 equations. One of the equations will have the reciprocal of the constant of proportionality in the table. So for every situation, you can figure out what the original constant of proportionality is, and then to go back, use the reciprocal to find the second constant of proportionality. Also remember, when you are writing the equations, you always want to have 2 variables, and those variables switch places when you're going from one equation to the second equation. So that's it for this lesson. Go ahead and end the video, and you can get started on your practice worksheet.